What is happening out there, Roto Scouts basketball fans? Some days there's just nothing left to do but click start on the show and start talking, you know? Sitting here clicking around the screen, trying to feel, it feels like there was something undone. We might stumble across it during the show, but I think we're good to go. A lot of chaos today, maybe that's just what it is. Little bit of a hectic, messy, ugly slate already for a 7-gamer, and plenty more to deal with, I'm sure. A lot of question marks coming. Cujo's here. What's going on, Cujo? Hope you're doing well too, bud. I'm sure we'll have some more people trickle in. A little short notice for today's show. I was thinking, whoop, now I screwed up the focus. There we go. I was thinking about kicking it off around 5. I was thinking 4:45, but I didn't want to sit here for 15 minutes doing nothing when we could be talking basketball, getting ahead of things. Instead of running the show up to like 7:15 for a 7:30 lock tonight, figured we could start at like 4:30 and actually get things going. Alan Mark is here. What's going on, Alan? Cujo's doing good. Excellent, buddy. Stephen Leibowitz is here. Appreciate the little like that you gave the projections on Twitter. I just saw that, Stephen. Always appreciate those. Anytime you guys see something pop up, if you get the chance, no pressure, but if you get the chance, just like being on here, you sign in, you hit the thumbs up. If you see something pop up on Twitter, if you happen to be following the at rotoscouts Twitter handle, or even at my at digitalb21 one, give it a little heart, a little retweet if you can. Just helps spread the word a little bit. We pick up people here and there. Alan Morgan, don't have to deal with the sadness of no Poku minutes. One day he'll get his fair shake. Yeah, it's we were talking about that briefly in Discord, but yeah, dude produces. I mean, at the very least from like a fantasy sense, right? For the things that we care about, I'd love to see him get more run. He seems like he deserves a chance. I'm not sure exactly what the hole is. I haven't seen, honestly, like enough of him sitting there watching him to know what the holes are really in terms of like why he's not really getting that shot. But yeah, it seems like a productive enough guy, and especially on a team like that. Like, what do they have to lose? Give him some time. Could be interesting over the next couple of weeks as things get uglier and uglier as we get through this spring basketball. Let's pull the board up here. I left those top two guys up at the top of the board just real quick for the start of the show, just so I could show that they are projected for a few minutes. Keon Ellis and Neemias Queta. I think Queta's active. He's not on the injury report. I only gave him a handful of token minutes just to put him on the screen. But neither of them had ownership, and I didn't catch it on the DraftKings sim over here. So they didn't go through, but neither of them looks all that relevant. Keon Ellis at 16 minutes. He's only 3,100, but only an 11-point projection. We've got better pieces. It would have been minimal. At the most, we're talking about like 1% over here. So I wouldn't really worry about it. I'm just going to delete those two guys right now so that we don't have to sweat it. And we can talk about all the actually relevant Boston guys at the top of the board. A couple more down here. Some down here. Lot of Boston today going up against Utah. Should be plenty of opportunity for offense. There's all kinds of opportunity for upside from their down bench pieces. If you didn't catch it, they're missing Jaylen Brown, Kristaps Porzingis, and then Al Horford as well on the second night of the back-to-back when everybody was questionable yesterday. KP sitting out his second game in a row. Drew Holiday coming back to play tonight. But obviously just elevation for Derek White, elevation for Luke Cornett. Tatum looks like Tatum with a little bit of juice on top. Not crazy runaway freight train added bonus per minute time, but a little bit. Enough to get him into one of the higher projections of the day. Nobody cracking 60 points on either site, but a solid handful in the 54 to 56 type range. And Tatum's one of those guys. Sammy Hauser's on the board. O'Shea Brissett is on the board at 3,900 on FanDuel, 3,300 on DraftKings. Drew is on the board, who I mentioned. It is a wealth of Celtics. Good day to be a Celtics fan for, I don't know. Do we have any Celtics fans in the crowd? I know my buddy Lou's a Celtics fan, but he doesn't tune into these shows. Yeah, Steven, I don't disagree with that. It wouldn't be completely crazy to see that swap with Tillman in the starting lineup, but they haven't really given him much time so far. And Cornette's had a good game the other day when he ran out to 22 minutes, I want to say. I feel like he gets the shot, but we'll keep an eye. Steven's a Celtics guy. All right. My bad, buddy. Yeah, White's a monster, 6.28 points per dollar. He's a 1.01 DraftKings points per minute on the season. But if you unwind it to this situation, it's like 1.4. I didn't give him the full 1.4, but I gave him a healthy projection. So definitely a nice big jump for Derek White. So let's talk about some of those injuries in addition to the Celtics, because we do have the Memphis Grizzlies, or at least half the Memphis Grizzlies on this slate. So we'll start there. Probables, Ricky Council, who's available for Philly. Giannis and AJ Green are both probable. Questionables, OG Anunoby, which would be nice to see him get back for the Knicks. It'll create a little bit of chaos with the minutes there. I've got a little disagreement going on right now with the projections over at RG for Precious Achiuwa, for one. They cut him down a little bit too far, I think. I still got him at 30. He's been playing, 36 to 42. But I think OG steps in, probably impacts the minutes for a number of those guys. So it'll be interesting if he goes. Right now we've got him in, so all the next stuff that we'll look at has him in. Additional questionables, James Johnson, Jalen Williams, Jordan Goodwin, John Conchar, Lamar Stevens. So obviously a lot of three key questionables for Memphis right there. Keldon Johnson's questionable, Marjon Beauchamp questionable, Keegan Murray, Kyle Anderson, Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, Monte Morris, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard. All questionable. A lot of names, a lot of key parts, several teams with several guys on here. So in addition to Memphis, we've got a couple pieces from Minnesota on here. We've got obviously two big names from the Clips on here. And then OG's impact to the Knicks. So there is a lot. We've had some slates lately where it's been, all right, a lot of guys are already out, but there's not that many key questionables. We kind of taken care of the unknowns. Today, we've got a lot of known unknowns, which is problematic for those of us who have to sit here and watch it all night and project it and update it. So looking at the guys that we already know are out, Robert Covington, Joel Embiid, DeAnthony Melton, Terquavian Smith. You'll notice that Maxey is not on that list. Maxey back for the Sixers tonight. Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, Benedict Mathurin, Doug McDermott, Marvin Bagley, Rashawn Holmes, Landry Shamet, lot missing for Washington, Desmond Bane, Scottie Pippen, Derrick Rose, Marcus Smart, Yuta Watanabe, Vince Williams Jr., Zaire Williams, all out from Memphis. In addition to the three guys who are on the questionable list. If all of Jordan Goodwin, John Conchar, and Lamar Stevens don't go, I think they're down to like 7-8 guys again. Or 8 guys. So it's going to be really, really constricted once again around a lot of ugly, ugly names. But we're going to probably end up going there because I see a few of them already at the top of the board here with Luke Kennard, with Jake LaRavia, guys like that. Santi Aldama, I'm sure, is up there somewhere. Gigi Jackson, I see in there on line 18. So we've got a lot of pieces there. Alperen Şengün, who's now out for the rest of the regular season, unfortunately, with I think it was an sprained ankle, I want to say. That sucks for Houston, but Şengün's out, Cam Whitmore's out, Chetty Osman's out, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, Kristaps Porzingis, Taylor Hendricks, Lauri Markkanen, Kenny Lofton Jr., Chris Middleton, Karl Anthony Towns, and Russell Westbrook are all out. It's a lot. 7 games. Like 37 players, either questionable or out. Take a look at the Vegas lines. Starting at the top, the Sixers and the Knicks in a redux of a game that was played to, what was that game the other night? Like 76-72 or something like that? It was a 1990s basketball score. It was ugly. Knicks getting OG back enhances their defense potentially. Certainly, adds a relatively productive NBA scorer, but not a scorer on the level of Maxey. You would hope that enhances Philly's upside for offense. But regardless, Philly at New York, Knicks favored by 6 at home, only a 208 total in that one. Lowest on the board by a 7-point margin. First game and the last game are the two lowest. 208 in New York, and then the Minnesota at the Clippers game at the end of the night is at 215. That one's a lot healthier. We could see some value emerge if either Paul George or Kawhi don't go. But that one's also a little bit lower end by comparison to some of the ones in the middle here. We've got Indiana at OKC. That one's 6 points in OKC's favor, but a 241 point total is nice and juicy. A lot of good players in that game. Should be interesting to see how those guys land. Easy enough to get to with the value that's going to be on the board. Should be easy enough to get to SGA, type lineups with several other good looking pieces. I'm sure SGA Tatum lineups are viable. SGA is like hiding in here. It seems reasonable on both sites. Sabonis is also getting some good traction on both. So I think there's plenty of money to spend is the point. And I think that Indy OKC game is an interesting spot to spend some of that money on the higher end players from that one. I think we get our values and our mid-range guys from some of the other spots. And that one we can focus on, the Tyreses of the world, the SGAs of the world. Washington at Memphis. Ugly, ugly spot on the Memphis side. Couple pieces missing for Washington too. Couple of the big men out. Bagley and Holmes, namely. 3-point spread there in Washington's favor. 219-point total. 3-point spread in between Houston and San Antonio in Houston's favor on the road in San Antonio. 222-point total there. Victor Wembanyama not on the injury report, by the way, so fully expected to play unless something changes between now and lock. Boston, Utah. 6-point spread in Boston's favor at Utah. Feels like it should, even with the absences, be a little bigger. It is the Celtics against the Jazz. But 230-point total in that one. And again, just everybody from Boston landing on the board pretty aggressively. And then the closest spread of the night, just one between Milwaukee and Sacramento, 235.5-point total. Looks like another healthy game environment. So it's several good games, a couple clunky ones, but there's at least 5 decent games, four good ones. We'll throw the Washington-Memphis in there just because of all the cheapo guys that are in that, and it's an okay total at 219. Just a couple of low totals, but some healthy game environments to pick from. It's just all these question marks. Going to create all kinds of chaos. So it should be fun. On a day like today especially, and I should have mentioned it a little bit more strongly yesterday, and I'm sure the vast majority of everybody watching knows that they have to do this. But when we're talking at 4:30, about a player like Javon Freeman Liberty, who was up here at the top of the board yesterday with higher numbers than these. You got to keep an eye on that as it goes toward lock. Because a guy like that losing a few minutes out of not starting, out of just other guy who I wasn't necessarily expecting to start and the need to pull some minutes from somewhere, he lost some minutes and it had a big, big impact on him, most particularly on FanDuel, where he was a little bit more expensive. It really sapped his FanDuel value. I ran a post-lock sim on DraftKings, and he was still coming up a fair amount because he was only, I want to say, 3,300. And he still had enough meat on the bone for the projection to realistically pay off that cheap price. So he went from looked really good to just like, all right, looks okay, looks playable as a low-end, cost-driven kind of a guy on DraftKings, and then obviously failed to come remotely close to paying anything off with like a 6-point night. But the reason I bring it up is not to talk about, the accuracy, anything like that. It's just the timing of the thing and figuring out what's going to go where. And some of those, we got to wait for those lineups. The point is, don't just go by these shows. You gotta be on top of watching those changes and just seeing how value changes throughout the night and how value changes pre-lock and then even post-lock. There were a lot of post-lock changes yesterday, too, as things were coming down for those later games where we had all those big question marks. So just something to pay attention to, something to know that, make sure that you're aware of. Maybe one day we'll go to a no post-lock swaps, late swap situation like DraftKings tried out. Was that just a one-off now? Have they said anything at all about success, failure? Have they given you guys who play over there any kinds of heads up? Yeah, Steven points out if Memphis is healthy next season and with a high pick coming, most likely it'll be fun. Yeah, I was saying it in our Discord the other day. It's one of the bigger who they were supposed to be and then what we got discrepancies that in recent years anyway for that team. They were not supposed to be anywhere near this bad. I mean, the names that I read on the injury report are just the guys who in a week or two might be back. I don't include all those guys who were like Ja wasn't on there, right? But obviously a pretty big piece. There's just so many guys that they've just lost for the season or for giant chunks of the season that are key players for them. So just lost season for them, but should be able to bounce back pretty quickly. Anyway, let's talk this thing through a little bit. Oh, DK's running another one of those on Friday, Money Jordan saying DK's got another no late swap coming on Friday. That's fun. And Cujo chimed in right after that with the same info. Appreciate it, guys. I didn't know that. Alan Margo really likes Gabriel. Better NBA player than Trey Jemison. I haven't seen enough to really weigh in on liking him, not liking him better than Jemison, to be honest. Looking at the numbers that those guys have for per minute, it's kind of ugly. Jemison's, I've got him at 0.85 today, and that's being kind of generous to him, but like you got to give a little bit of production to some of these guys. Gabriel got at 0.79. 16 minutes, 3,900, 3,600. I don't know how playable he's going to be. We'll see where we can find him in here. But yeah, those guys are cheap enough with enough expectation of some time that it wouldn't be completely crazy that, if Gabriel goes from like the 16 that I've got him projected out and somehow plays 22, 24, that becomes a quick value spot. And that's the thing that's just, with spring NBA, it gets really ugly with some of this stuff. It gets more and more difficult to keep up with these changes. Alan says, I used to coach college ball, so this is my fix since I don't coach anymore. Really like Gabriel. All right, cool. I'll happy to take that. Definitely. Especially with a track record in coaching. Where'd you coach? Are you secretly like Coach Krzyzewski or something? Can I Google you? Can I find out that you used to coach the Florida Gators and I didn't know it or something? Let's see. Let's see if you come up. SUNY Adirondack? Was that it? Not to like dox Alan Marga here. You pointed it out. Just saying. That's cool, though. Very cool. SUNY Adirondack. There you go. All right. So that was one of them. All right. Georgia on D1. Very cool. Very, very cool. All right. Let's talk Slate a little bit here. Jump into some of these guards. That's a lot of Dylan Brooks. I know he's popular today. I just want to see what those numbers look like compared to the field. He's the third most popular guy on FanDuel. Oh, he's the top of the DraftKings board. I was looking a couple spots down. He's the most popular guy on DraftKings. Yeah, a lot of Dylan Brooks. Very, very chalky Dylan Brooks up near the top of the board. 66% on FanDuel, 59.3% on DraftKings in terms of our top 150 exposure. Okay, it looks like Keta is available. Dylan Brooks, never a comfy guy for me, has directly cost me a significant amount of money at times. The price is right, though. The expectation of time is right. He is very, very capable of just doing this, though. 30 minutes the other night, 15 FanDuel points. For the season, he's at 0.69 per minute. 17.5% usage. He's not afraid to chuck on the right night. But the actual production that you get out of Dylan Brooks on a lot of the time can leave you kind of cold. It's just the price is effective enough, the positioning is effective enough that it makes sense that he's coming up pretty aggressively. 50+% win rate on FanDuel at shooting guard small forward, 45% winner on DraftKings at 4,300. Just to start us off with a non-Celtic. And obviously we're getting some pieces from Houston here. Brooks, Van Vliet, Amon Thompson, and Jalen Green all in our top, 8 guys? So Boston, Houston, for sure at the guard spots and some obviously into the small forward spot. But to talk Boston a little bit, we touched on Derek White up at the top of the show. Jumps to a very meaty per minute number for the season in the situation that they've got tonight with all those guys out. It's in like the 1.4 territory, depending on what kind of time frame you look at. I've got him, I think, at like 1.2 and change tonight. So I didn't go nearly as aggressively as I could have. 119 is where I landed. I feel like you could go more aggressive than that. Played 34 last night, put up 39.7 FanDuel points. Just a good price for somebody who's got that kind of a ceiling today. 7,600 on FanDuel is not bad at all for him, and 6,900 on DraftKings, very, very functional. 53.8% win rate, 68% of the top 150. On the FanDuel slate, 57% win rate and 56% of the top 150. So we are getting a little bit more of Dillon Brooks at the slightly lower win rate, but I expect most of the FanDuel lineups that we see in the sim at the top. I don't expect. I know for sure that we're going to see a ton of lineups with both of those guys in them. Sammy Hauser came out, put up 33 in 31.9 minutes last night. Comes right back today with similar minutes expectation. 4,200 at small forward only on FanDuel. Looks pretty good. 22.9% winner, 25% of the top 150. But on DraftKings 4,300, you get him at multiple positions. 30% win rate, 22% of the top 150. That puts him at, let me reload, catch the ownership update. All of these Celtics are going to be popular. All of the guys at the top of the board are going to be popular. Sammy Hauser. This is DK. We are, call it at the field. It's a little slight bit lower than the field, but that would, you could go between this number and the field's projected number in the next sim without changing anything. Just a little happenstance maybe. But the field and our ownership are both lower than the win rate. So there's a little bit of room there on DraftKings if you want to go ahead of the field. It's kind of a spot where you can pick your position. If you like the upside of Sam Hauser at price a little bit more, you can get out to, I would think about 30%. Put you a handful of points ahead of the field, or you can come down as low as 20, 22%, be a handful of points below the field. He's an interesting inflection point for this slate. It's a low usage rate for sure, 0.71 per minute. Not a lot of guys, even with the depleted lineup, necessarily going to be deferring to Sam Hauser. But just pressure over time at price, even 0.71 over 30 minutes at price, gives you a reasonable median, gives you a pretty solid little upside into like this kind of territory for what remains a very cheap cost. Freddie Van Vliet should go 37 at a minimum. I was toying with giving him, a little bit more in terms of time, but I think 37 is probably about right as far as a projection. Played 38 last time out, put up 41 FanDuel points. He's been at 1.02 for the season, 1.03 on DraftKings. Solid little 18% usage rate. There's just a bit of an uptick for everybody in Houston, or at least presumably so, in terms of having to create some offense. So I've got Freddie, and especially they're going over against a San Antonio team that's not exactly aggressively good at stopping teams. They're picking up about 4 possessions here. So there's a couple of reasons to give a little bit more on top of Houston. So I've got Freddie in the 1.16 territory. Dillon Brooks, we mentioned for the record, I've got Dillon Brooks up at in the 0.8 range, which jibes a little bit with his production in this kind of a scenario. Not totally comfortable with that one. Might bring him down a little as we go. Where am I relative to? It's interesting. If I bring him down, we get probably more aligned with the field, and I don't know that that's necessarily the directionally correct way to push that. Here's what I don't think about it. It'll be a minor change. I mean, if I take away half the bump I gave him, he goes down to 24.5 from 26.1. Minor change, but could be impactful enough. In Thompson, I've got in the 116 territory. He's been at 113 for the season. Minor bump for Amin. And then Jalen Green has been at 0.98, and I've got him at 1.16 for today. It's been a little bit of an uptick in recent run, and then, again, situational. So any one of those guys, I don't know how many of those guys together. I certainly don't want all 4 of those guards. Can I even do that? Yeah. FanDuel you can anyway. And looks like you can on DraftKings too. So 2 of those guys probably does it for me. I don't know that I want to go to 3 of those guys. I don't know that I want to go to 4 of those guys. And I don't think you necessarily would need to. But they land pretty effectively. Amon doesn't land at all on FanDuel, but he does on DraftKings. There's a ridiculous price discrepancy. This might be one of the biggest price discrepancies I remember seeing ever. Amen Thompson is 7,500 on FanDuel at point guard and shooting guard. Landed in 0.03% of winners and none of our top 150. On DraftKings, Amen Thompson is a $4,900 point guard shooting guard. 21.3% winner, 26% of the top 150. That is an absurd price difference from site to site. Very, very playable on DraftKings, not all that playable on FanDuel. Jalen looks great on FanDuel, 50% winner, 49.3% of the top 150 on DraftKings. He's 7,800 on DK, 72 on FanDuel. So on DraftKings with shooting guard small forward eligibility, 17% winner got to him 13% of the time in the top 150. Lands us right around the field on DraftKings. And then on FanDuel, we're a little bit ahead of the field. We got about 10 points on the field. Matching our 50% win rate. I don't really mind that. Where's Yeah, and the Amen Thompson ownership on FanDuel just completely jibes with this. Just not really. You can see it in the points per dollar. 3.73 points per dollar on FanDuel. 5.47 points per dollar on DraftKings. Completely different play. Fanatics here. Fanatic. Brooks is trash. He could play 48 minutes and I still wouldn't play him, especially versus Boston at that. Can't believe people actually tell you to play him. Hey, he's cheap, buddy. That's all that really matters. He is cheap. He's also not playing Boston, by the way. He's playing San Antonio. Does that do anything for you? The fact that he's playing San Antonio and not Boston gives him a little bit more to work with. Just not a good fantasy player. I'm totally with you, Fanatic. You're not wrong. I said it when I started talking about him. He's probably my least favorite option for DFS in the entire league. Ever. Has directly cost me a significant amount of money. But yeah, it's difficult to argue with him at price with the expectation that he's going to play 30 plus minutes, 30 and change. Let me get the recent run here. Good old Wowie, NBA Wowie over at addmorefunds.com. We'll give them a little plug for no good reason. All right, so we want to talk Houston, and we want to say, oh, come on. I plug them, and then I'll sit here struggling with the way that their site works. All right, no Şengün, no Cam. I think that's really the two key pieces. Alex there. That doesn't matter. He hasn't played in months. All right. So, let's see. Did this earlier, but failed to memorize it, as usual. And now I'm watching the little green bars go as it loads. So Brooks, since the start of the season, 239 minutes, 512 possessions in this scenario, 0.78 per minute. So it gives him basically a tenth of a point per minute on top of where he typically is in just all situations. And then, like I said, I give him a little bit more gas than that. The difference between 0.78, what he's been in this situation all season, and the 0.82 that I gave him is pretty negligible. If I was to try and target the 0.78, it would remove exactly 1 fantasy point. So if you wanted to say he's a 25-point player instead of a 26-point player tonight, and we can, I don't want you to say quibble even, because that implies that like there's actual disagreement here. I do agree that he's not good. I just don't agree that he's not a good play, if that makes sense. But it would be quibbling over a couple of percentage points, right? If you knock this down to 25 on both sides, 25-1, 25-8, and just put him at the rate that he's been in all situations all year with these guys out, doesn't really move the needle that much. Maybe this would drop into the 40s and this would drop into the high 50s. Maybe this would drop into the 30s and this would drop to the low 50s. But he would still be a pretty meaty play. It's not going to be good. When we talk tomorrow, I will be sitting here saying, boy, if I just didn't have Dylan Brooks in that spot at 4,500 and I had gone to Sam Hauser for 42 and saved money, I would have been a happier man. I'm telling you right now, that'll probably happen. But on this side of lock, it looks like a good play. Yes, the Spidey sense is tingling. Yes, I don't feel good about having to say that it's a good play. But I'm obliged to follow the math. So yeah, can't believe people will tell you that you should play him. If you only knew Dylan Brooks and watched him as like and evaluated it by that, or if everybody cost the same, then yeah, you don't play Dylan Brooks. If everybody on the slate was 5,000, you don't play Dylan Brooks at all. Ever. You literally would never put him in a lineup. It's just because, as Stephen Leibowitz points out, DFS is a math problem. That's all we're doing here. This is not fantasy sports. This is math. Especially with basketball. Anywho. Hopefully that didn't come across too lecture-ish. Drop third strike. Brooks hitting 2 quick threes, but getting ejected in the first quarter for pushing Wemby is the most likely scenario. That is also 100% on the board. The funny thing in my mind is I'm picturing like Wemby, like, he's that lanky body. You give him a shove in the right spot, probably just topples him over and could get ugly. But he's also like, athletic enough that he might just turn it into a cartwheel or something. Brooks ceiling game, you probably have to have him. Yeah, that's also fair. Alan Marga calling out the Boban revenge game. Order respect to pop and double in 5 minutes. Yeah, I agree. Non-zero chance of a few minutes. I think I threw him 2-4 somewhere around there. But I agree. There's a little bit of potential that just they throw him. He's not going to be on this screen, obviously. I give him 4. Not hitting the board at all right now. But yeah, we've seen him be a points per minute monster at times. If some kind of lineup landed where he's in that starting lineup, then that's going to be another pretty strong value play. Better believe. I watched on Amazon just last night, actually. The hell's the name of the movie? Jake Johnson, the Lonely Island guys. Self-Reliance, it's called. It was all right. I was enjoying it a lot. I didn't love how they ended it. Not like hilariously funny, but clever and weird kind of a movie. But the point of it is the basic plot is people are after Jake Johnson trying to kill him for convoluted reasons. And Boban is back in a hitman role. Not reprising the character from Wick 3, but doing a similar kind of a thing, which was cool to see. Just out of nowhere, you see this giant hand, and I was like, oh my God, it's Boban! Because who else could it be? Still love that scene in Wick 3, though, when they're fighting in the library. Oh, such a good scene. Anyway, let's keep this thing rolling, huh? Jason Tatum, always comfortable to go to. 10 grand on FanDuel, 9,700 on DraftKings. Prices are not raised commensurate with the situation for Tatum tonight. 1.30 for the season. Plenty of upside here. Gave him a little bit of additional on top of that for the situation, for the absences, for the kind of pushover opponent. Love the spot for Tatum here. 46.5% winner on FanDuel, 56% of the top 150. Over on DraftKings at 97, both forward spots. 41.6% winner, 49% of the top 150. Easily the star player of the day on both sites. And I'm realizing that I was talking about guards and unwound that to talk about Boban. That's how I landed on Tatum. I was like, why is Tatum on the guards page? Speaking of stars of the day, I did bring up SGA earlier. Great game environment. Highest total on the board between OKC and Indy. Should be some good pace, some electric scoring. SGA at 11-3 on FanDuel, point guard only, landed in 11% of winners, 16% of our top 150. On DraftKings, 13% across the board at 10-5. Not a bad option from the star tier either. I would imagine, like I was saying, you could probably afford some SGA and Tatum lineups with all the pieces around them. And back up a little bit up here. Tyus Jones from the Washington side of that Washington-Memphis game. On the other screen just a minute ago above Tatum, we also saw Kyle Kuzma looks pretty good. Washington pretty depleted as well. Memphis obviously a pushover right now and completely depleted on their side. But Tyus Jones at 6,900, priced pretty effectively for what he's been, 1.01 per minute on the season. Played 38-2 the other night, put up 42.8 at price. That 42-point night is both on the board today and pretty reasonable. That doesn't necessarily 42 points from a $6,900 player or from a $6,200 on DK doesn't necessarily win you the slate, but it keeps that spot completely competitive with winning lineups. If you're getting a 40-point game from, and that applies to a lot of guys. At a point there's just, all right, I just need a raw number in that spot in my lineup. And there's the give and take between, all right, this guy cost this and he got me that. So now I've got a little bit more room for these guys to not have to go nuclear ceiling. So I think at price, pretty effective spot for Tyus Jones. Thompson we touched on. Devin Vassell. Why do I keep doing that? Devin Vassell, 7,900, 7,500 over on DraftKings, 20% winner over there. About the same on both sites. Basically 20% across the board. Obviously a fairly electric score. We are slightly ahead of the field slightly ahead on DraftKings, slightly behind on FanDuel, it looks like. But very, very minor. It's another spot where if you reran it, 3 times, you would get one right with the field, one right below, and one probably slightly over. I think Vassell looks like a good option in the 20% range across the board. Green, we talked about. Luke Kennard. God, is he on that list? No, it's Conchar. Conchar's questionable. Kennard should be good. Or good to be out there anyway. I want to say he started yesterday or their last game, I guess over the weekend. I feel like they play every day also with all these absences. I feel like they've just been on like every slate lately, but I think that was 2 or 3 days ago. But he was in the starting lineup last time. I think, let me double check that. Regardless, played 22 minutes, didn't have a game. That was the 10th on Sunday. Yeah, he started, so the minutes came off. He didn't play the fourth quarter. Kennard, Santi Aldama, Triple J, all 3 of those guys didn't play at all in the fourth quarter in that game. Which is bonkers because they only ran, what? All right, they did have Jarrow in that game, so they had 9. I would expect Kennard back in the starting lineup and reasonable enough upside. 0.76 per minute over the course of the regular season, 16.3% usage, but more to do, more to work with for him today. I don't know. What do you say about Luke Kennard, really? 65% true shooting. Pretty good. 45.2% from 3. That's pretty good. Taking 6 a game, making 2.7. Not bad. And again, with more work to do, a reasonable expectation of a few more 3-point attempts, if nothing else. And if you're shooting them at this level, that level. I think assuming that he plays 28 to into the 30s somewhere, there's certainly room for Luke Kennard. 37.4% winner, 40% of them in the top 150 on FanDuel. Looks a lot better on the blue side at 4,700 than he does at 5,000 on DraftKings. But he's very playable on the DraftKings slate too. Point guard and shooting guard, 16-17% across the board. No issues there. I want to see where we're at relative to the field on FanDuel. got to be ahead of the field, right? Yeah, healthy little chunk ahead of the field on FanDuel. Projected ownership for the field is well below that win rate, too, which is kind of interesting for a guy like Kennard. I don't hate that spot. Just you could run into limited minutes again. It's the only thing that could really screw it up. Or just, obviously missing all those shots. Drew Holiday looks pretty decent. Just another key Celtic. Should get back to his usual run tonight. 15% of them in the top 150 on FanDuel. 18% of them on DraftKings. 7,100 versus 6,600. Point guard only on both. Looks like a reasonable option. He's been at 0.90 for this season. I think I gave him right around that. Maybe I might have given him like 5/100ths of a point more. Where did I land him? I give him the full 10th of a point. All right. That's what I've been doing with a lot of these, just trying to land the offensive matchups when there's a strong favorite going up against a fairly weak team, even when they're depleted like this. I've been giving them about a 10th, depending on who they are. I think that's correct, given the absences and everything. It doesn't really shave too much down from the White and Tatum plays. So I think Drew with about a point per minute expectation, reasonable enough. If you're building a bunch of lineups, he's definitely in a solid handful of them. The 15% range is pretty perfect. Malik Monk, FanDuel, not relevant. DraftKings, pretty playable. 13.8% winner, 21% of the top 150 on DK. Monk is a good piece. And we're well ahead of the field there, too. That's about 4x without going completely haywire with the exposure to Malik Monk. Not a terrible spot. Milwaukee like a mid-range defense. I think at worst you can expect an is who he is kind of a day from Malik Monk. And since we're getting him ahead of the field in Sims, spot's looking pretty decent. He's been at 114 for the season on DraftKings, 110 on FanDuel. Got a little bit more than that for him tonight. In a game where they're picking up like three and change possessions versus their average. I think it's about right. Patty Connaughton from the other side of that game is only 3,300 on DraftKings. 13.3% winner, 8% of the top 150. At 4,100 on FanDuel, he didn't hit the board at all. But at 33 on DraftKings, that's functional. What is he owned at? Puts us like right in line with the field. I don't love that since it's like right on the field's number. For a player like that, I think I'd rather have a position. I want to be a little ahead, a little behind, rather than just dead on with everybody. 0.65 per minute for the season, a 10% usage rate. 17 FanDuel points in 26 minutes the other night. Got him at 24 and right around 17 again. At 3,300, it's just a price-driven spot on DraftKings. The win rate being out a little bit ahead of the field is the only encouraging thing really here. That does give us a little bit of room. It's just, I don't know that I want to go out to like 13, 15% Pat Connaughton across that many lineups. One of the clunkier spots that is showing a little bit of value, but again, just entirely based on the price, even at the low per minute, even at the low usage. So it's at least effective. I would probably roll it like 5%. Across 150 lineups, I would probably undercut that field mark, even though the win rate is a little higher. I don't have a lot of faith in the Pat Connaughton play. If it was showing us like a 13% and we were a couple points ahead of the field, and maybe if we reran it, we would be. then maybe I'd be saying, all right, there's a little bit of room. You could maybe get him out to like 13, 15. But since we landed like right with the field, I think the undercut is a little bit better. It's like right on the line between those two. So I think my analysis of Pat Connaughton just boiled down to it's on the line between play him or don't play him. Sometimes you can talk a lot and not really say anything. SGA we touched on looks really good across the board. Dame looks pretty good. 10% of them in the top 150 on FanDuel. Half that on DraftKings. But with a little bit more room. And for a guy like Dame Lillard, it's a complete opposite situation. When we've got a little bit of room ahead of our ownership in the win rate, I'm perfectly fine going out to like 10% Dame on DK. That puts you still a little bit below the field. The field would be a handful of points ahead. Maybe just dead on at 10%. So like around the field on Dame, I think is perfectly fine. 8,800 is a pretty effective price for him. 89 over on DraftKings. Obviously the FanDuel price a little bit better. 1.18 per minute on the season, but has his outbursts. Has his damn time nights. 38 minutes the other night. 57.9 FanDuel points. That'll get you there for 8,800 most nights. DiVincenzo got him cut down to 34 minutes. He played 36 the other night. The potential for OG coming back. He's been around a point per minute, a little bit higher than that in the recent stretch. But I think he dropped back down to like the point per minute level. Probably loses a couple of minutes. I think Josh Hart takes a bit of a haircut in minutes. I got him from, he's been at 39 lately, 40 the other day. I cut him down by 3. I think he could realistically end up playing like 34 as well. So there might be a little bit of additional haircut here for Josh Hart, but already not coming up like crazy anyway. 7,300, 7,200 across sites, just single digits. Looks better on FanDuel by a little bit, but non-priority. DiVincenzo does look better on FanDuel than Hart does, and DraftKings. But still not really a priority. Less than 5% of them in the top 150 on DraftKings, less than 7% of them in the top 150 on FanDuel. A little bit more to work with in the win rate on him on both sites. But that's going to be, if OG doesn't come back, then I think you can fire up both him and Hart like we have been recently. I question what the minutes actually look like for some of these guys, though. Koulibaly's playable on both sites. Just kind of single digits and lower exposure than we got him in the top 150. But without a lot of their big bodies there should be plenty of time for him. Should be plenty for him to do. Not exactly a lot of stiff competition on the Memphis side. Other guys, we lose a few of these on FanDuel, but they've got single digits. Just a few mid-type guys. TJ McConnell, Josh Giddey, Kevin Huerter. All basically look, are who they are kind of night on DraftKings. And at price on FanDuel, just not coming through at all for any of those guys. Didn't get any of those three in the top 150 on the FanDuel slate. Which maybe a little bit surprising, especially for Josh Giddey. In a game with that much pace, that much expectation of scoring, it's just 6,600. Not that effective at 25 minutes, even from a 1.10 player. 4.26 points per dollar on FanDuel. 5.14 on DraftKings makes him make a little bit more sense. Beasley, not much expectation. A little bit better on DraftKings at 44 than he is at 49 on FanDuel, but not a priority on either site. Jordan Poole, really don't like the player. 0.94 per minute for the season, 25.2% usage rate. The usage is great. I'll give him that much. I do have him at 0.97 for today. I wanted to keep him under a point per minute. I didn't think it was reasonable to give him all that much more than that. They're not picking up any possessions really to speak of. It is a pushover of an opponent. They are missing some pieces. I do have 30 minutes on him, but I didn't want to give him more than a point per minute. Again, he hasn't been there for most of the season. Been 0.94 for most of the season. Last year, 1.03. Obviously in a better scenario. And then just want to look at Since the start of February, he's been at 1.06, over 501 minutes, 1,091 possessions. But we go like this, like that, and then who else is missing? Shamet is the only other key piece. When we take out the three pieces that are missing, Marvin Bagley, Rashawn Holmes, Landry Shamet, 183 minutes since the start of February, 400 possessions. So a quarter of that full chunk since the start of February, basically. And he's been at 0.85 per minute, 0.89 on DraftKings. It's situational. Some of that is when those guys were active, but just not on the court with him and so on and so forth. But that's what the number's been. So that's kind of why I decided not to put it up over a point per minute and just keep it around a little bit higher slightly by 0.03 of a fantasy point per minute than his just season-long number. I can see where other sites would have him a little bit higher, but I'm pretty comfy keeping him at 29 on FanDuel. And sorry, DraftKings people, he got into the 30s by a little bit. He does have upside. He's also got a pretty big downside. De'Aaron Fox, just low single digits, but obviously plenty of ceiling. 4% of the top 150 on DraftKings, 2% on FanDuel. Hart, we talked about. Colin Sexton. Don't love people going up against Boston for sure. 10% winner, 7% of the top 150 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, got to him almost 5% of the time in winners, but only a little bit. 0.67% of our top 150 lineups. Clarkson's playable. Tyrese Halliburton definitely playable. One of the higher ceilings on the Indy side. They're going to do anything against OKC if that game is going to stay tight and be hard fought and high scoring. Tyrese is going to have to get his at 9,100, 4.42% winner, and we got him 8% of the time in the top 150. At 9,000 on the DraftKings slate, 3.8% winner, got to him 4% of the time. We are, should have clicked on the Indy side of that, not the OKC side. We are slightly below the field on DraftKings, but we're talking about, 1.5 to 2 points, both in terms of the win rate and the top 150. And then on FanDuel, did we get ahead of the field? No, we're like right at the field on FanDuel. And the field and our results are ahead of that win rate. I suspect that means there's just money available. So his just raw projection and standard deviation as they go through the sims, by virtue of having money to spend, land in a few more of the lineups than their win rate looks like. And he's also got just that upward trajectory of being one of the highest potential scorers on the slate. So he lands in the top lineups in those 4% that he does hit. The majority of that 4% across the 50,000 sims, well, maybe not the majority, but you get what I'm saying. A bunch of those lineups land in the top 150 because he's got such a high ceiling. There's Peyton Pritchard, the lost Celtic guard. Reasonable potential for him. Got him at 24 minutes. We talked about it yesterday, the way that they distribute those minutes when guys are missing. He came out, played almost 30 last night, put up 32.6. Not bad at all. I could easily see him going back out and playing around that again. But last night's scenario was no Drew Holiday. Today we've got no Jalen, no KP, no Al Horford. But I think, reasonable expectation of losing about 5 off of this, unless they're really lighting it up. If they're smoking Utah, then I could see Pritchard getting back out to the 28 to 30 range. I think I'm comfy having him around here, though. 9% winner on FanDuel, 3% of the top 150. 3.4% winner on DraftKings. Interestingly, none of the top 150 on DraftKings. That kind of jibes. He's not projected for high ownership. The public ownership is a little bit higher than our win rate on DraftKings, which is never a good thing. I wouldn't begrudge anybody a few shares but it definitely looks like not a priority spot unless something changes. It looks like just maybe to have a couple shares and not even get to the field. The field is in the mid-single digits. Jalen just still priced appropriately, 92, 93 across sites. Hopefully getting a little help back with OG coming back. Has upside into the 1.2 to 1.5 range. He's been at 1.19 per minute over the season. Was obviously banged up fairly recently. Has come back at about a point per minute recently, but plenty of upside. As I mentioned, though, this game just the other day went to what was the actual score in that? 79-73 in this game on Sunday. Now, again, that was no Tyrese, no OG, so there's a little bit of quality, NBA quality coming back. But these two teams demonstrably capable of playing a very, very low-scoring game, and it's easily the lowest total on the slate. Again, they're at 208. The next lowest total is 215. So there's a big, big gap in quality from this Philly Knicks game to everything else on the slate. Here's Tyrese right here. Full expectation, just popped them right back to 36 minutes, averaging 37 over 55 games on the season. First night back, though, I could reasonably see they might put a restriction on him, say, hey, he's going to be 30 minutes tonight. If we get any kind of news to that effect, it'll impact the projections. But fortunately, it doesn't really matter because he's not really coming up at all. I do think he's minorly playable just on a easily their best scorer tonight kind of potential and 27% usage, which probably crests into the 30s in this scenario. It's just his price isn't lowered for having missed the last month or whatever it's been. Trey Jones, moderately playable on FanDuel. Not a priority at all on DraftKings. It's really the only key outlier. Anthony Edwards is playable on FanDuel, and we got to him a little bit stronger than the win rate, 4.6, and we got to him 9.3% of the time. On DraftKings, he didn't really come up at 9,700. Mike Conley, also moderately playable. But again, this Minnesota and Lakers game, actually all four of those guys. But what a group. Paul George, James Harden, Mike Conley, and Anthony Edwards. It's a pretty solid little group of guys that didn't really come up all that much. 0s and 1% on DraftKings for all four of those guys. On FanDuel, you did get to them in the low single digits across all those guys. So a little bit more potential at price on FanDuel, and that is the late game. So for those that like to leave a little bit of swappability, you do at the very least have some good players in that game to work with. There is that. Paul George and Kawhi, questionable still. If either one of those guys misses, you get a little bit of juice for the other two. No Kawhi, Paul George, James Harden go up. No Paul George, Harden and Kawhi go up. If they both happen to sit, then this gentleman will probably launch into the stratosphere. At 86, 87, that would get interesting. I wonder what is the rate for Kawhi or for Harden in that situation. 5:30, 7:30 lock. We got a little time to explore stuff like this. I know we're still just on guards, but there's a lot to talk about with the guards right now. Let's go back to November. $261 minutes, 566 possessions since November 1st with no Kawhi, no Paul George on the court. Ooh, I got to take Russ out of there too. $136 FanDuel, $144 DraftKings. That becomes just 82 minutes once I took Russ out. I think the numbers were about the same. I'm just going to pop Russ back in there to increase the sample size. I'm pretty sure it was dead on the same numbers. That a little bit less. 131 on FanDuel, 1.37 on DraftKings in 261 minutes. But again, that's with Russ out there. So an appreciable jump for James Harden if we get that scenario with no Paul George, no Kawhi Leonard. One to watch going into the later part of the evening. I think you're going to want to have Kawhi. You're going to want to have Harden if it comes down that way. $8,600. It's not like he's at a crazy, crazy discount. It wouldn't be slate breaking, I don't think. But I think the true ceiling on it would be aggressively better than a lot of these guys through the middle. He would probably crest up to maybe like Dame level here. Right? I think that's probably about right. 8,600 versus Dame's 88. Similar position, actually more flexible positioning, $200 less, 4 points off the projection right now, with reasonable expectation to get to at least that 42 that Lillard's at. I would say he would jump to these numbers, if not better. And the exposure against the win rate, we would probably have a decent chunk of them against the field. If, like, you set it up, and that's the fun thing with Sims too, you can set it up and sim it that way, right? I can go in, and if I wasn't constantly having to update the site, and I could monkey around with my projections and then just reverse it all for myself, or just like put stuff to the side that I know is, this is the actual stuff, this is the experiments. It's a lot of fun to sit there and mess with those situations. So like that would be an interesting experiment pre-lock. Just rerun it with Harden getting that additional juice just to see what it looks like in that late game. If you get that situation, see if it's valuable to reserve that spot for Harden. You can always pivot out of it if you don't need it. Just one to think about. Like I said, critical to keep an eye on things going up toward lock, especially as we get deeper into the spring. Let's talk some forwards. Let's see what you guys are talking about. OG in? Beautiful. The other side has Thompson almost 4 DK points over Brooks, but also 600 more. Brooks with higher ownership. Now I want to go back to that. I have them about dead even. They're probably just giving Amen more minutes than I am. I've got them like dead even on DK, 26.8 for Amen. It's literally 100th of a point. 26.81 for Amen, 26.8 for Dylan Brooks. But that's with Brooks getting 32 minutes and Amen getting 24. So if I gave Amen like 26 minutes, it would put him right in the territory that you're talking about, Steven, because he's a 1.16 tonight. So it's probably a minor difference. I bet they have him at 26 minutes, maybe 27, somewhere in that territory. I wouldn't think they've got him at 24 and just tweaked his rate extremely high. And I could easily find him 2 additional minutes. I could take 2 of the 6 minutes that I gave to Reggie Bullock, for example, and just give them Tom and Thompson. So yeah, and that's all just within the range of variability, within the range of expectations. Get up to Amen's last 5, 20, last time 26, before that 18, 19, 21. Over the last 3, 21.3, last 5, 20.8, 21.3 over the last 10 for the season, 19.7. The minutes have bounced around a little bit, but I feel like 24 is probably the correct projection, with obviously upside to probably like 28, but I would bet you they've got him at 26. Let's keep this thing rolling. I got sidetracked. Jarrow, I have Alan Marga for $14.5 DraftKings points. Down here at the bottom. Didn't really come through. It's 5,200 on DraftKings. 48 on FanDuel. You got reason to believe that there's more upside there, Al? Certainly willing to listen. Not at all familiar with the player. Did come out in 28 minutes and 33 and a half fantasy points in their last game on Sunday. Obviously relevant. He's a guard, so it probably does depend on Conchar and Jordan Goodwin. Both of those guys questionable. If you lose these two, and we're down to just these, 8 guys? 8 guys? Then, yeah, I think he goes back up to, I would probably project him for 24 to 26 with 28-minute upside, depending on how this all broke down. I think it's correct. It's certainly correct to give Conchar his 28 there in this situation. I could see saying take 5 from here and give him here. Maybe I'll split that a little bit closer. Make it like an 18-19 kind of a situation. Yeah, exactly. More 28 to 30 if you get Goodwin, Conchar out. Bingo. Same page. So 2 key guys to watch, obviously. And that's just, across the board here for Memphis. If you get down to an 8-man maximum, there's just, everybody's going to look good. But that would definitely create some upside for Jarrow here. Good question. Glad you called it out. I appreciate that because I forgot to mention him. Let's see. Boston again at the top of the board. A little bit of Washington to talk about. As much as I didn't like the pool spot, I do like Corey Kispert here. I do like Kuzma here. Kuzma's a guy that comes up for us a decent amount of the time, 1.17 for the season. Went out the other night when we talked about him, played 38, put up 50. It's reasonable from an $8,700 guy, 8,000 on DraftKings. Lands a little better on the DraftKings slate at price. Also has center eligibility over there. Small forward, power forward on FanDuel. FanDuel 29.3% winner, 36% of the top 150. DraftKings 42.7% winner, 45% of the top 150. And then Kispert at just 4,900. Played 39 minutes the other night, put up 35 FanDuel points. Has a little bit more upside than that, but at 0.82 per minute for the season. This is around our expectation, but we do have a little bit of ceiling there. 38.17% winner, 60% of our top 150 at 4,900 on FanDuel. A lot of small forward Corey Kispert today. And on DraftKings at both forward spots for 5,000, still got to him against the lower cap, still got to him 59.3% of the time. Looks like an aggressively good spot for Corey Kispert. Sammy Hauser. He's got guard. We talked about Sammy because he's got guard eligibility. But again, 20s across the board on FanDuel, 30 on DraftKings. Jake LaRavia, looking like a good spot on the other side of that Washington-Memphis game. One of the Memphis pieces that I like a little bit. 0.88 per minute for the season, but has been on a decent little run of better than that. Got him in the 1 territory, about a point per minute territory tonight. Reason to believe that he could succeed against a not overly challenging Washington team. Plenty of minutes there for him. Played 24 the other night, put up 25 FanDuel points, but no Triple J tonight. Gives an 8-man crunch is going to have an impact. So I like the spot for LaRavia. I like Santi, who's down here because he's a little bit more expensive relative on DK at 61. So Santi on DK, not a great option. 5% winner, 4.6% of the top 150. Very playable, but not a priority. On FanDuel, a little bit more of a priority. 22% winner, power forward and center eligible for 6,000. 13% of the top 150. Probably a little lighter than his public popularity. I can't stop updating this. While I wait for that to reload, let's check the news. Aja Thompson now questionable. There's a wrinkle. OG will play. Oh, that's for Wednesday. Is that for Wednesday or did they just fuck that up? Oh, that's Aja Thompson. Oh. Twins. Amen Thompson, good to go. Aja Thompson, questionable for tomorrow. Got it. I'm glad I put that together before I went down a rabbit hole and didn't piece it together. Yeah, young guy. Like the idea that they're going to give him minutes for Laravia Allen. Exactly. Allen's nailing it in the chat today. Didn't get blowout run, but with shrinking bodies, think he might be safe and should be just a more competitive situation. Bear with me 1 second here. My texts are going crazy. Anyway. So let's see. Going down the board here. Jalen Green, we talked about a little bit, but again, priority on FanDuel. 50+% win rate, just under 50% of the top 150. Looks good and playable on DraftKings at 7,800, but you're talking about 17.2% winner and 13% of the top 150. Obviously, a very, very different play across sites. O'Shea Brissett with the idea that he'll get a little bit of run today at 3,900. Not really a priority on FanDuel. At 3,300, does give you 17% win and about 11% of the top 150. So just another cheapo price-driven option. Think it works. So I think that's an effective spot for Green. Priority on FanDuel, effectively playable on DraftKings. Brissett, again, effectively playable at the cheapo price on DraftKings. And then we get down to G.G. Jackson, who looks decent on DraftKings and pretty good on the FanDuel slate. 28.9% winner for G.G., 32.6% of the top 150. Over on DK, 15.4% winner, 9% of the top 150 at 5,600, 5,700. He's power forward only on both sides, so a more effective option on the FanDuel slate. On DraftKings, you'll find him as Gregory Jackson. Denny, another piece from Washington. Washington, Memphis, all over this board. Boston, Utah, Washington, Memphis. A little bit of Houston, San Antonio, and not a lot of other things. And then your stars. Denny looks good at 71, both forward spots on FanDuel, 32% across the board, 7,000 on DraftKings, small forward only, 15% across the board. So he looks basically twice as good on DraftKings or on FanDuel as he does on DraftKings. But at worst, he's very playable. Averaging 28.8 minutes for the season. Got him projected up to 36 tonight. He played 35.5 the other night. Put up exactly a point per minute. Reasonable expectation for at worst and is who he is kind of a spot for Denny. Give you around a point per minute and play 36 to 38 minutes. And I think there's reasonable upside into the 40s. Monk, we talked about. Connaughton, we talked about. Slow-mo. Nobody's favorite. 0.87 per minute for the season, 13.7% usage, has missed a couple of recent games. I don't know that I want to prioritize Kyle Anderson in this kind of a spot. 5,600, just priced correctly for who he is. He comes up a little. The 20% win rate is kind of compelling on FanDuel. We just got to him 12% of the time. I don't love that game environment. I don't love the Minnesota side, and I don't love the player. He's also questionable. Monte Morris, Kyle Anderson, Rudy Gobert, and Anthony Edwards all still questionable. Yeah, he's owned. He's owned between the win rate and our exposure here. I'm comfy with the undercut. I will let the field try to beat me with Kyle Anderson. Across 150, I would have 10, 12%. 1 to 3 to 5 lineups to 20 lineups. If you build 20, maybe put them in 1 or 2. If you build 3, I don't think I get him. I think I give him to the field if I'm building 3 lineups. DraftKings, I think that's an easier decision. Just 5% against the 11% win rate. It's the same decision, but it's a little easier. And we're below the field on the ownership. So exact same situation on DK for Kyle Anderson. And again, easier decision because you don't have the 20% win rate to worry about. Jalen Williams is questionable. If he plays, definitely looks like an interesting spot in that high-scoring, potentially high-octane game against Indy. 17.5% winner on FanDuel. We got him 20% of the time. Happy with that. 11% winner on DraftKings at 6,900 power forward only. Reasonable little price dip there, or appropriate, I guess, against the lower cap. But 18.6% of them against an 11.5% win rate tells me that we are ahead of the field, about double the field. Just got to get him out there, and he looks like a reasonably good option against Indy here. DiVincenzo we talked about. Koulibaly we talked about briefly earlier. Pascal Siakam, another piece from the Indy OKC game. Actually, two pieces right here with Lou Dort there. Dort looks better on DraftKings, 5% across the board. Just an is who he is spot for Lou Dort, though. If you ever go there, you can go there tonight. Not one of my favorite options. Usually not all that compelling to get to. Usually just priced correctly for the kind of guy that he is. 0.74 per minute, 14.7% usage. 4,200 on DK. It's effective enough. If you're building 150 and you threw him into 5%, I think you're correct. But it's another spot where if you're building even 20, maybe one, it's not really a priority by any means. On FanDuel, you don't need him at all. Little outlier here, 22% for Santi. Who we talked about just before. But again, power forward and center eligible, 6,000 on FanDuel. Played 27 the other night, put up 25 FanDuel points. Not going to get you there at that price, but he's had better games than that of late. At 61 on DraftKings, just a 5%er. Not a priority over there. Bit of a priority on FanDuel. Lamar Stevens. I say because of games like that. 12 FanDuel points in 30 minutes. But for the season, we've been at a fantasy point per minute, just playing 12 minutes a night over 31 games. If you can get him to a fantasy point per minute over a 22-minute expectation, then sure, I've got him a little bit ahead of that. I don't love it. I've got him at 1.09. The ownership that I'm projecting against is based on a higher projection, or the ownership that we simmed against, rather. We're a little bit ahead of the field on the FanDuel slate, even with them projecting him higher. On DraftKings, he doesn't look all that relevant at all. 4,900, it's a minorly effective price. What we'd be looking for is this time. You get him out to 30 minutes at around a point per minute, then we're talking about a little bit of a buy for 4,900. I just don't know what that time looks like. It's just a lot up in the air for Memphis. It's another spot that's going to be affected by who's active. Minor outliers in Conchar, who's one of the questionables. Aaron Nesmith. Not that great. 7.4% winner, but just 2% of the top 150. None of these guys really all that relevant on DraftKings. Paul George a little bit. John Collins a little bit. He's been very good lately, although he had a clunker the other night. Sohan, minor. Nobody really popping for priority as far as site-to-site difference. Anybody we didn't touch on in here? Sensabaugh, not really looking all that prioritized today, fortunately. That whole Sensabaugh semantic thing I can do without today with all the different pieces available to us. I feel like I missed somebody, but I don't know who it is. Yeah, Crowder not looking all that great. Kawhi, if he plays, moderately playable across both sites. Low single digits, though, across both. At best, and is who he is kind of a situation. I think the best thing that could happen in that Clippers game, honestly, for DFS purposes, is to have both Kawhi and Paul George sit and give it to James Harden, give him a little bit of upside. I don't think that's what's going to happen. This is kind of an interesting game up against Minnesota there, so I would expect they're going to get out there if they're at all able to. I guess that's it. On the forwards, anyway. Obi Toppin. little bit of run available for Obi. He's been decent. He's been around a point per minute over the last month and change. 0.89 for the season. Had a 31.6 performance on FanDuel in 25 minutes the other night. Coming back with 22 tonight. Not hitting the board at all at 4,600 on FanDuel. At 38 on DraftKings, we got him a little tiny sliver. But just, the idea of potential minutes, the idea that he's been playing a little bit better than his season-long production lately, the best game environment on the slate, just rolling him into that OKC team isn't the best overall option. But we did get him, what's that? 3%. We got him 4. We got him a little tiny sliver ahead of the field. We're talking about a very low priority option, but he is 3,800. Somebody to consider if you're building 150 and you've got tons and tons of, $3,300 O'Shea Brissett, $4,300 Sammy Hauser. You can make a little room, scratch one or two of those shares out. Pop a, not Crowder. There you go. Pop a $3,800 Obi into a couple of those spots, and maybe he surprises us. He's had those surprising games this season. It's not off the board at price. If he was any more expensive than this, I wouldn't be talking about it. Alan saying, I don't see how Houston's going to contain Wemby. If they don't start Landale, I assume they double in the post and Spurs shooters will have a field day. Yeah, that's an excellent point and could lead to additional upside for a guy like Devin Vassell. And I just totally agree. We were talking about Wemby on yesterday's show, and just the fact that since whatever it was, February 10th or whatever, he was at 2.0 FanDuel points per minute for the season. It's just been completely bonkers. So yeah, I think there's plenty of good expectation for Wemby. He's coming through at, I think I've got him at right around his season-long 1.7 today. Maybe I give him a little bit more for the San Antonio thing. But I think there's difficult to project massive ceiling there any given slate at this point. 30.9% usage, 1.70 per minute. You can see him. Again, I made this comp yesterday, and obviously the other guy is an established superstar who plays significantly more minutes per game. But you can see it right there. 1.64 versus 1.70 for this season. He is quite good. 11.4 versus Giannis's 11.9. Technically, you're buying a little bit better of a per minute mark. But Giannis, again, going to play more time. We've got to project it at 5 additional minutes. Wemby on the second night of a back-to-back, right? That was last night? Yeah, second night of a back-to-back. Coming off the injury, but again, not on the injury report. So I got to expect that he's going to play regular run. For him, that's been 28-8 a night over the course of the full season, but lately 30-31. But just with the idea of protecting him, the idea that he was banged up, the idea that there's not a lot of size for him to have to worry about on the other side, I could see a 28-minute night today for Wemby, which would definitely shave down the upside at that price, even with the absurd production. So there's a critical 4 minutes maybe in flux for Wemby that could make all the difference. Now, he could go out and play 26, 28 minutes and still put up a monster. He could get 55 points in 28 minutes. It's just he doesn't have 80-point upside in 26 minutes. So it puts a little artificial cap on it, but that is not something that Pop has said. As far as we know from the media and everything, full go for Wemby. So he only simmed through at 7% of the top 150, 5.4% winner, 1.6%, 1% at 10.6 on 10,600 on DraftKings. So we didn't get him a lot, but he is firmly entrenched in that. He's a luxury. If you can save money and you can get to him, you can compare him to the other stars. You can compare him to Sabonis. You can compare him to Giannis. You can consider him on that level. Cornet, top of the board. Almost 80% of the FanDuel lineups at 4,400, center only. With some competitively good centers on the board. Fortunately, we get power forward access on Sabonis. We get power forward on Kuzma. But there's a stretch of reasonably good centers here. Well, there at least. Chet, Miles Turner, Walker Kessler, Rudy Gobert, all center only. Coming up in the low single digits, giving it all to Luka Cornet. Put up 20 and 21 last night. 0.99 per minute on the season. Give him a little bit more juice today. Not much. 1.06 for tonight. With reasonable run for additional time. Gotta like it. On DraftKings, he's a 51% winner, and he's in 82% of the top 150 at 4,000. We do still get our shares of Sabonis, even though he's center only. We still get 17% of them because you got the Utah spot to work with on DK. So there's a little bit more flexibility around the rest of these guys. Kuzma's got power forward access there and looks great. So you have a lot of Kornet, Kuzma, maybe plus one of these guys. I think there's room for that. Sabonis looks like the pick for the second center in a lineup. But I think you got a little space for Chet. Little even less space for Turner, but there's a little there. Kessler, interestingly, didn't really hit on FanDuel, where he's a better option in a per minute sense. That's why he's 61 over there versus 49 on DraftKings, where he did hit a little bit because he's so cheap. 7.8% win rate, 6% of the top 150. Gobert playing 1-1-1 for the season. No Cat for the foreseeable future for Minnesota, so a little bit of an uptick for Rudy Gobert. Doesn't look like a priority by any means, but capable enough fantasy performer, assuming that he's out there at all. Still questionable for today. Didn't go in their last game. 6.15% winner right now. 2% of the top 150 on FanDuel. At 79 on DraftKings, 5% winner. Barely got to him in the top 150. If we get no Rudy, then this guy becomes even more interesting. Right now, not really shining through at 8,000. Naz Reid. 8,000 on FanDuel, not really coming through. 7,000 on DraftKings, not really coming through. Did have this night the other night, 44.5 in 42 minutes, about a point per minute kind of an option. So unless we're giving him more time, I've got him right around his per minute production for the season. They're picking up exactly 0 possessions going up against the Clippers. This is like a dead even game. So I think a reasonable expectation of about a point per minute. So wherever we end up projecting Naz Reid, give him that with a ceiling of like plus 15 to 18, somewhere in there. It's obviously got big time upside. We've seen it. So Naz is an interesting one to keep an eye on. And that's another one from that last game of the night. A lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts in that last game of the night. Jalen Smith, good point per minute performer, not a lot of minutes. Didn't play last game. Scratched post lock, if I remember correctly, last game. So screw him. Not really, but just for tonight. Doesn't look all that relevant. 3% winner, 4% winner, 3% of your top 150 on DraftKings. Not at all relevant on FanDuel. He's 4,000 on DK. You do get him at power forward, so maybe you can sneak him in a little bit. It is a high upside game. They are missing some pieces on Indy. So maybe there's a little bit there just because he is such a good per minute performer, but not a high priority either way. Lamar Stevens we touched on before. Jeff Green, 3,700, small forward only on FanDuel, power forward and center on DraftKings at 4,500. Did land in 4.3% of winners on DK, but we didn't get him in our top 150 at all, which is interesting because, fairly reasonable amount of minutes expectation here. The field is under 10%, but closing in on 10%. If you wanted to have a few shares of Jeff Green, I don't think it's necessarily bad. I would go, call it like 5%, go out to like the win rate. I think that's fine. You're still cutting the field essentially in half. On FanDuel at 37, though, that's a little bit interesting. 19% winner, 19% of the top 150. He's a 0.67 per minute guy, 14.4% usage rate. He played 10 minutes the other night, put up 8.9 FanDuel points. If you get that, obviously it's a disaster. But they're missing a good amount of size there in terms of their... Let's see. So you've got, let's see, Green at 6'8", 235. Jabari 6'11", 220. Landell, obviously, 6'11", 256 is big. And would presumably get a decent chunk of center run. Boban is obviously gigantic, but we're pretty limited in our expectations without news there. 7'4", 290 pounds for the record. Everybody else who's active is pretty smaller anyway. Yeah, it's not my favorite call out of the year by any means, but I do think it is effective enough that he should be in your consideration at the small forward spot on FanDuel. You do have a lot of pieces to work with all the multi-position guys, both with value and spendy kind of guys there. So I wouldn't necessarily say you need to go out of your way for him if you're building one lineup. If you're building 150, you should absolutely have 15, 20% of them. If you're building 20, you can throw them into a couple. Just an uncomfortable guy to have in that range. But that's good. That tends to keep the public at bay a little bit. His FanDuel ownership is... Ooh, all right. That's a wrinkle. FanDuel ownership's higher than I thought it was. So we're actually below the field. I'm going to scratch what I just said about Jeff Green. I think everything I said stands in terms of the value and the potential there, but with that much of the field on, yeah, I think just getting him right around that win rate is probably about right. So that 19, 20% at most. And actually there's probably a decent amount of reason to undercut that and look to some of the other value set small forwards. I think he's effective, but the public is there not quite twice that exposure, but closing in on twice that exposure. So yeah, the more popular Jeff Green gets, the less I like him. Again, playable. 19, 20% is probably correct. Let the field have the other 15, 20% that they want of him. And we'll be happy when, I don't know, Dylan Brooks succeeds and Jeff Green fails. Or no, Brooks is popular on that team too. God, I hate these Rockets. I wish this team wasn't on this slate. They're screwing up what could be a reasonably good value day. Don't like it. Nobody else really standing out. 6% of John Collins, who we talked about when we were going over forwards. Wemby we've touched on. Trey Jemison does have a little bit of potential. I know Alan prefers Wendy and Gabriel. If you get any kind of news on minutes, on starter, etc., that could change. That's one to keep an eye on as we close in on lock. That game is an 8 o'clock start, so we should probably have that news well ahead of lock, or at least reasonably close to lock. He's been at 0.76. He played almost 21 minutes the other night and put up 8.8 FanDuel points. At 4,100 on DraftKings, just a 2%er. Didn't get him in our top 150. DraftKings is super concentrated, by the way. I mean, just those top 6 guys, that's 164% of center ownership. If you want to take Kuzma out of that, it's 119 between center-only guys. So you're talking about 19% overflow into your util spot between Cornette, Sabonis, Chet, Turner, and Kessler. It's a lot of center ownership and then just not a lot for all of these guys down the board. And then Wemby will go out and put up 100, and it won't matter. Giannis, again, I talked about Giannis, but looks playable, is who he is, luxury item, however you want to call it. 2.3% winner, 4% of the top 150, 4% winner, 4% of the top 150 on DraftKings. We've seen a couple slates lately where there's a lot of value. Like I think we had it with Luka and Jokic yesterday, where they were looking good, and we were getting to a lot of them because there was so much value. This one, it looks like we're probably going to end up a little bit more, despite the clear values on the board. I think we do end up landing a little bit more balanced looking since like SGA wasn't through the roof, Giannis wasn't through the roof, Tatum's cheaper than those guys, and we got a lot of Tatum. We got a fair amount of Sabonis. But I feel like it's a little bit, even with the value, a little bit balanced-y. Which brings us up to time to look at some of these lineups and these sims. Oh, sorry, Mike. I missed your who's getting minutes in place of Mathurin. Ben Mathurin out for the rest of the season. Let me grab Ace Mind here, and we'll pop the lineups up, and then we'll talk about that real quick. So let's see. Last time out, TJ played 27. Obi played 25. Both of those were upticks. There was a Nemhard only played 25 though. Not exactly sure what happened there. So that's probably where more TJ's time came from. So Obi got a little bit of it. And then just looks like it's at least going by that last game and the game before. Jalen missed the last game. So there was a gap of 20 minutes available there. It just looks a little bit spread, honestly. He had gone 25, 31, 20 in the games before that. So Obi took an appreciable 10-minute jump out of that. And then call it 15 to 20 minutes that kind of distributed across some of these other dudes. Like in the first game that Mathurin was out, Jarris Walker played 16 minutes. Ben Shepherd played 19, but he had played 22 the game before that. Ben Mathurin played 25 in that one. But then in the next game, Jarris Walker only played 3. Ben Shepherd played 11. They were a little bit more concentrated at the top. Neesmith went from, he went up to 37. He had been at 30 the game before, 22, 28, 21 going back. So he picks up a little. So I would say probably, just a little bit of additional legs for Neesmith. A probably 8 to 10 minute actual expectation, which is in the projections already for Obi. And then just sprinkling minutes across the rest of these guys. All right, let's see what do we got on the screen here. So there's everybody we've talked about through the show. DraftKings lineups for the 100K. Bigger buy-in today. A ton of Derek White. Makes a lot of sense. An absolute ton of Luke Cornett. We were getting him in the 80% range across these top 150 lineups, so you can just kind of look down that middle column here, how much Cornett there is. A lot of Drew Holiday. Some Tatum in here. Not as much Tatum really jumping off the page at me, unless I'm just missing him. There's one. There's one. That's interesting. The very, very top lineups didn't have quite as much Tatum. Looks like there's a lot more of them down here. You're talking about minor differences between these top 10 and then the next 30. A couple of Sabonuses got up to the top, so Cornett Sabonis, like we talked about. Seems to be the primary second center to go in, and again, that was it was what 80 and change for Cornett and 17 and change for Sabonis. So it makes sense that we're seeing a lot of that pairing. This one's got Chet and Cornett though. We saw a little bit of Chet getting there as well. But Cornett plus another center does look like, Cornett plus a high-end center does look like a reasonable combo on DraftKings. Still leaves you room to get to Tatum, Derek White, reasonable option, and Kuzma, Kispert. I don't know that I love all three of these guys together in the same lineup, Koulibaly, Kispert, and Kuzma. Obviously, we've got everybody's favorite Dylan Brooks in a few of these pretty aggressively. Just position by position, it looks like we're fairly spendy at point guard. A little bit of SGA in here is good to see. Not that much of them, but a little bit. Derek White is fairly straightforward and obvious in a great spot today. Kennard, as we talked about, reasonable expectation of upside there, assuming that he actually plays full game. Vassell with that upside and the potential of, as Alan was pointing out, potentially doubling Wemby and kicking it out to a lot of their shooters all game long would be pretty advantageous. So plenty of upside for Vassell. But we're spendy enough at the point guard spot. We obviously have basically interchangeable Derek White, Dylan Brooks. Interchangeable in just the amount of times they're appearing in that shooting guard spot, not interchangeable in terms of their upside, their production, their quality, how I think of them as human beings or anything else. But in this shooting guard role, they are going back and forth. A lot of White, a lot of Brooks, minor shares of Koulibaly. Amin's in there a little bit. So call that like either a mid-rangey value spot or just like a pure mid-range spot with Derek White. LaRavia I like to see in these lineups at the small forward. A little bit of a rotation with him and Kispert, but we do have room for some variability around Hauser. You can put Dylan Brooks in that spot, obviously. Devo, Denny. You can get Tatum in that spot. A little bit of reasonable flexibility through forward. And then a lot of them where you don't use them here or at the guard spot. You're getting Dylan Brooks over here. You're getting Kispert over here. A little bit of Malik Monk. Mostly savings again at center. Excuse me, I skipped power forward. Power forward, you're getting a lot of Kuzma, Kispert. A little bit of Gigi. A little bit of Santi. But a lot of Washington at the power forward spot. Makes a lot of sense. It's where most of their best players are available. Cornette or a high-price center in the center spot, and then just the other one in that combination in a lot of these lineups in the util spot. You do have some where it's Cornette, Freddie VanVleet, Cornette, Malik Monk, so it's not all of the top lineups having the double center, but double center looks pretty viable on DraftKings today. This is mostly who you didn't get over here, you get over here. Same with the forward spot. That very, very top lineup, bring back $500 on your 15. That'll do. 0.38% win rate. It's not a big number, obviously, but that's a high win rate for what we really see on here. 33% casher. And so it's interesting. It's significantly lower cash probability, but it gets there more often in terms of winners than these higher cash lineups. These will get you to the line, but these won't get you over the line as often. And again, we're talking about 0.38% versus 0.32% of 50,000. So that one was Freddie, Derek White, Jake LaRavia, Kuzma, Cornette, Connaughton, Dylan Brooks, Domantas Sabonis. But I think that does hold up what I was saying about the about how the slate looks. These are pretty balanced lineups. Sabonis is a little bit expensive. SGA obviously is starsy and very expensive. But a lot of these are, Vassell, Brooks, Hauser, Kuzma, Cornette, Derek White, Jalen Williams, Freddie VanVleet. That's just pure balance across the board. So even with value available, and if some other ones emerge, if you get some of the $3,000 guys, that'll change the scenario a little bit, and you'll get a little bit more angled toward Starsy Scrubsy. You'll have a little bit more room for additional SGA. You'll have a little bit more room for additional Giannis shares. You'll probably see a lot of direct line to Sabonis and Tatum through that if more value emerges. But it's interesting. It is a somewhat balanced slate. And I tell you what, a lot of people who don't sim, a lot of people who don't use tools and just build a lineup, throw it in, might get kind of Starsy Scrubsy more with this one. Might say, hey, I can afford a SGA and Giannis lineup. It's getting pricey, but you get me. I I think the vast majority of the industry at least uses something or looks at a site or, what have you. But yeah, there's a little bit of potential for not the majority of the public, but for a chunk of the public that, for lack of a better word, ignorant part of the public, right? You guys know who I'm talking about. No offense to them. But that part of the public, there is a little bit of opportunity for them to get a little bit off the beaten path the way it looks right now. I think that could be interesting for the slate. Oh, yeah, no sweat, Mike. Mike just saying, kind of wondered if it wouldn't be shared among a few guys. That is, basically the answer that I was trying to give, but I do think there's a little bit mostly, as I was saying, around Neesmith and Obi, just for a handful of minutes to those two guys. And those are the two guys that are out of that group most likely to produce, right? I think those are the guys that you would want to get to in that scenario if you were looking to grab those minutes. But yeah, always happy to the best of my ability anyway, answer those questions. This is the FanDuel slate. Notably, that's a lot of Luke Cornett. Got a little Wemby there. Got some Chet. This one's interesting. Cornett, Giannis, Tatum, Kispert, Jeff Green, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, Conley, Derek White. I just noticed it because it's Tatum and Giannis together. That's an interesting little lineup. Top one on FanDuel, SGA and Wemby in it. So FanDuel is looking more Starsy Scrubsy to me. Van Vliet, Hallie, Derek White, Kennard, Hauser, Brooks, Denny, Tatum, and Cornett. That one's a little bit closer to balance just because Halliburton and Tatum aren't necessarily priced as high as they maybe could be. But even that one leans a little bit more Starsy Scrubsy. So FanDuel, you get, I think, a little bit more peaks and valleys. A lot of good names on here. As usual, well, no, not even actually. It looks like you've got reasonable double spends at point guard. Van Vliet and Halliburton, it's like upper mid-range and spendy. Derek White, mid-range and incredible value today. And SGA is very spendy. So like a lot of room for mid-mids and then a lot of room for like mid-star. And even like, marginal star at point guard. Tons of Dylan Brooks, Derek White. A lot of them in the same lineups, a lot of one here, rather than like piling Brooks and White. Here's a Brooks and White at shooting guard. But I feel like White, based on this, looks a little bit more effective in the point guard role. And that gives you a spot to maybe get to a Devin Vassell, a Jalen Green over here. Jalen looks like he bounces back and forth a little bit between the two positions. But White, I think, is maybe a little bit better as a point guard. Anthony Edwards popping into this one. So at shooting guard, it does look a little bit more like you're getting, and we'll just name him, Dylan Brooks, plus a decent player. Brooks Vassell, Brooks Green. Kennard and White, obviously, are reasonable here. You can double save at shooting guard, though, a little bit. Savings at small forward in one of the spots, or a Corey Kispert, Jason Tatum, and then actually these Kispert, Jalen Williams in both of those, Tatum and Kispert together. Kuzma and Tatum in this one is a weird little combo. That's an outlier compared to all the other lineups we've discussed. Look at this one. Derek White, sure. Jalen, little oddball today. Wasn't really hitting the board on either site. Kennard, fine. Dylan Brooks, fine. Kuzma, good. Tatum, good. Neesmith, all right. Maybe. Jake LaRavia, good. Cornett. Just a weird looking one compared to some of, how common the rest of these are. Cornett all the way down at center, except for a couple oddball shares. We do have a Jemison landing, but not many of them. A couple of Chets in there. We get a little bit of differentiation down here. Hartenstein getting into one of them. Not a lot of expectation for him tonight. A lot of Luke Cornett. And then room for stars. Again, it's most of these break down as like a save, spend, spend. I might drop this in as my placeholder. I just like the looks of this one. I don't love the Conley part of it. Is Conley questionable too? I forgot. Edwards, Gobert, Monte Morris, Kyle Anderson. So no, Conley not questionable. Especially if we lose all those guys. Could be some upside for Mike Conley. Could be a little bit sneaky. Another name to keep in mind for later on. I didn't really talk much about him, I don't think. It didn't really sim through all that aggressively. He's better on FanDuel. 5,500, 6.3% winner. We got him 8.6% of these top 150 lineups. On DraftKings, not at all on the board at 5,700. We got him 1% of the time, and winners 1.3% of the time in the top 150. But if that spot just becomes better in that last game of the night, yet another just interesting moving part in that last game. There would be more upside for Anthony Edwards in that scenario as well. Naz Reid, who we talked about, would jump if you don't get Gobert. If you don't get Gobert and slow-mo. A lot of potential for shake-up in that Minnesota and Clippers game. I would, just with all the quality there, I would want to leave, what do we have? That one and Milwaukee, Sacramento are both at 10. Boston, Utah is at 9. So, but at the very least, going up in the run-up to the 9 o'clock game, I think I want to have like 4 positions from those last 3 games on either site in my lineup, just to buy a lot of flexibility. And then we're going to just naturally have tons of guys from Boston at the very least. But I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of focus on leaving some room for those games and to be able to flex around position. And I mean, you're talking about losing Philly and the Knicks at 7:30. Not losing because you're not taking it out by any means, but if you're dedicating more spots to those late games, the early games, Philly and the Knicks, that's super low end. Washington and Memphis, we're getting a lot of pieces of, and those would probably be the guys that I'm working around that lock in at 8 o'clock. Indy OKC does have high upside, and I would have some pieces from that. Houston, San Antonio, same thing. There were a couple key pieces obviously coming out of that with like Dylan Brooks, Freddie VanVleet look pretty playable. Obviously, we want to get our Wemby shares. But Boston, Utah, Milwaukee, Sacramento, given that Giannis and Sabonis are in that game, and then just all the potential moving parts in Minnesota, LA, I want to have flexibility into the late night. If you've got a lineup that ends, everybody's locked at 8:30, I think that's a mistake. I'm not typically on the you gotta leave room for the late games. You gotta leave X amount of spots. You can only win if you've got somebody in the last game of the night. Like sometimes sure, sometimes not. Flexibility is always good. Flexibility is always an asset. But tonight, especially, and I was saying it about the game the other day, and it paid off pretty well. But tonight, definitely, I want to leave some room for those late games. Paul C. This will get spicy when Tillman starts. Sure would. Sure would, buddy. Let's see. Tillman is 4,000 on FanDuel, center only, 3,800 on DraftKings, center only. At 18 minutes, he didn't hit the board at all, but if you cranked him up to like 28 with 0.96 for the season, and would probably give him a little. I would probably have him 101, 102, somewhere in that territory. What do I have him at now? I actually undercut him now. Maybe I give him back a little. It's a small sample so far for him with Boston, but it's been low. A lot of that number obviously came with, not with Boston, but I could give him back like 2 fantasy points here. Put him at like 16 in the 18 minutes. Might be a little bit more realistic. And then if he got to that, if he got in the starting lineup and back to around the point per minute or, 0.9 and change, would definitely look pretty good at those prices. Yep, good call. Another one to watch. A lot of variability around starting lineups today, guys. Glad I touched on that and made a key point out of it earlier in the show. As lectury and as much as that might have sounded like me harping on something or me trying to cover for having somebody projected really well that didn't work out, and then trying to point to oh no, I changed it. That's not it. look, we get shit wrong all the time. These projections come out hours before we do the show, hours before. There's going to be a lot of misses like that where things change. The point of all of that I was talking about earlier was for your purposes, for my own purposes, we got to keep an eye on things. You got to always be going back and checking, because a guy loses just 4 minutes, or a guy doesn't start when we thought he was going to start as a value play, but you can still expect him for, it's now 28 instead of 32, 33. That could have a huge impact for these guys when we talk about, a couple $200 salary gap makes all the difference. So critical to keep an eye on things and keep checking back right up until lock. And then each game, come back 20 minutes before each game's, each 30 and on the hour. Come back 20 minutes before and just double check, because a lot of stuff changes. You can typically catch it. I try and make the notes on the site of, what the news was, at least that the things changed around. You do have to infer or keep an eye on like where the numbers themselves actually changed. I wanted to do a plus minus, which I think has value, but I couldn't figure out the best way to do it just because there's so much chaos, and sometimes there's minor changes, sometimes there's big changes. So it would be a little bit structurally weird, but I do think that would have value, just saying, hey, since the last update, this is +3, this is down 5 for guys like Freeman Liberty last night. That obviously would have been key. But yeah, Tillman, everything from Minnesota and the Clippers, all the pieces from Memphis that are still up in the air, the pieces from San Antonio that are still up in the air. There's a lot to worry about tonight, or wonder about tonight. With that in mind, guys, I'm going to go worry and wonder about it and build my own lineups and keep everything updated on the site. Went almost 2 hours today. Bunch of you guys hanging out. I appreciate it. You guys rock. Without you, there's no show, as I've said a bunch of times. Make sure you're coming back for baseball. I'll figure out a good schedule so that we can hopefully, at least some days, continue doing some basketball shows. I'm thinking we'll probably try and do like an early day baseball. I might go 2-a-days for baseball. I have no idea. But I like the idea of getting on early for baseball, because you can. So we'll see. But that'll be coming down in the next couple of weeks. So I'm excited about that. But for now, I will wish you well. I'll say good luck. Somebody go win something. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel, gang. Adios.